Salve and welcome back to our Athenaeum. While the history of Rome is often written in marble and steel, its triumphal arches, its legions, its emperors crowned in laurel, there are other stories, quieter but no less enduring, inscribed not in stone but in the human will. These are the stories that survive not because they were enforced, but because they were remembered. Today we turn to one such life, a woman whose voice did not command armies, yet whose silence in the face of power became its own form of resistance. This is the story of Saint Crispina. To understand Crispina is to step into the final tense years of the Roman Empire's great persecution of Christians. Under the rule of Diocletian, the empire sought unity through obedience, religious, political, and cultural. His edicts were not merely administrative, they were existential. They demanded that every citizen demonstrate loyalty by sacrificing to the Roman gods, a ritual that symbolized submission to the empire itself. Refusal was not interpreted as private belief, it was rebellion, it was treason. And yet, in the fertile and sunlit lands of Numidia, in the town of Thagora, modern-day Taura in Algeria, lived a woman who quietly embodied defiance. Crispina was no outsider to Roman society. She was woven in its very fabric. A noble woman of wealth and status, she belonged to a class that benefited from Rome's order. She had a family, children, property, and social standing, everything that Roman life promised and protected, which is precisely why her refusal mattered. When Crispina was summoned before the proconsul Anulinus in the city of Tevest, present-day Tebessa in Algeria, the trial was never meant to be equal. It was staged, carefully calibrated. The goal was not justice, it was demonstration. A noble woman must not resist. If she did, the illusion of universal Roman control would fracture. Anulinus understood this. He did not begin with cruelty, he began with persuasion. He spoke to her not as an enemy, but as a man trying to guide someone back into the fold. He invoked her children, her maternal duty. He reminded her of her wealth and her comfort. He appealed to reason, to fear, to the deeply ingrained Roman instinct for order. Think of your life, Crispina, he urged. Do not abandon it for stubbornness. But Crispina's answer did not waver. It did not rise in anger or rhetoric. It remained calm, almost disarmingly so. She did not argue within his framework. She stepped outside it entirely. Her allegiance, she said, was not to Rome's gods, but to a higher authority. I have never sacrificed to demons. I sacrificed to the one God who made heaven and earth. In that moment, the trial shifted. It was no longer about compliance. It became a confrontation between two worlds. One built on visible power, and another rooted in invisible conviction. Anulinus escalated. He mocked her beliefs, dismissing them as superstition. He threatened her with punishment, reminding her of the full force of Roman law. But Crispina was not uneducated or naive. She understood the law, and she understood how to resist it. She invoked what she called the eternal law, something older than Rome, something that no emperor could legislate away. In doing so, she undermined the very premise of Roman authority, that it was absolute. So, when reason failed and threats proved ineffective, Anulinus turned to something more calculated: humiliation. He ordered her head to be shaved. To modern eyes, this may seem symbolic, but in the 4th century it was devastatingly concrete. For a woman of Crispina's rank, her hair was not merely aesthetic, it was identity. It signified dignity, status, femininity, and social belonging. To strip it away publicly was to strip away her place in society. It was to reduce her from noble woman to spectacle, from respected figure to object of ridicule. It was, in essence, a social execution before the physical one. And yet, something remarkable happened. As her hair fell to the ground, the expected collapse never came. There were no tears, no pleas, no attempts to cover her head or hide from the crowd. Crispina stood still. Exposed, yes, but unbroken. The act meant to destroy her dignity instead revealed something deeper, that her sense of self did not depend on what Rome could take from her. She looked at Anulinus not how a subject looks at authority, but how one human being looks at another, and declared that what he had done touched only the surface. Her body could be altered, her appearance stripped, but her soul remained intact, beyond his reach. In that moment, the power dynamic inverted. Rome could command armies, enforce laws, and shape public perception, but it could not compel belief. And Crispina, standing there without the symbols of her status, embodied a kind of freedom that Roman authority could neither grant nor revoke. With humiliation failing to break her, the trial reached its inevitable conclusion. Anulinus signed the sentence. On the 5th of December 304 AD, Crispina was executed, beheaded as many Christians were at that era. But death in this case did not silence the story. It carried it across North Africa and beyond. Her memory endured, not as a tale of suffering, but as a model of steadfastness. Among those who preserved and amplified her legacy was Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential thinkers of late antiquity. From his pulpits in Hippo in Carthage, Augustine invoked Crispina not merely as a martyr but as a philosophical argument made flesh. Was there anything more beautiful than Crispina, even when she was shorn? He asked. It was not a rhetorical flourish, it was a redefinition of beauty itself, not as something external but as something rooted in integrity. In Crispina, Augustine saw proof that the city of God was not a distant ideal, but a reality that could exist within a person, even under oppression. Today, the physical traces of her life are faint. The towns have changed names, empires have risen and fallen, and the rituals that condemned her have long since disappeared. But in places like Taura, in the quiet ruins scattered across Algeria, there lingers a sense of continuity, a reminder that history is not only made by those who rule. Crispina's story endures because it speaks to a fundamental question. What remains when everything else is taken away? Stripped of status, of appearance, of safety, she was left with nothing but her conviction. And in that, she discovered something Rome could never comprehend. That true power does not lie in control over others, but in mastery over oneself. She lost everything the world could offer, and in doing so, she became impossible to conquer. And so, as we close the doors of our Athenaeum, we leave behind the courts of Tivest and the fading echoes of imperial command, carrying instead the quiet strength of a woman who refused to yield. Crispina's story does not ask for admiration, it asks for reflection. In a world that constantly defines us by what we possess, what we display, and what we are willing to concede, her life poses a sharper question. What are we not willing to surrender? Empires rise on power, but they endure in memory only through meaning. And sometimes it is not the emperors, but those who stood before them, unarmed and unafraid, who leave the deeper mark. Until our next gathering, may we continue to seek not only the grand narratives carved in stone, but the quieter truths carried in the human spirit. This is Maysalun, signing off from Athenaeum Maysalun.